Chapter 26. The Eighth Plague. Exodus chapter 10, verses 1 to 20. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go in unto Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart, and the heart of his servants, that I might show these my signs before him, and that thou mayest tell in the ears of thy son, and of thy son's son, what things I have wrought in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know how that I am the Lord. And Moses and Aaron came in unto Pharaoh, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, How long wilt thou refuse to humble thyself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. Else, if thou refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow will I bring the locusts into thy coast. And they shall cover the face of the earth, that one cannot be able to see the earth. And they shall eat the residue of that which is escaped, which remaineth unto you from the hail, and shall eat every tree which groweth for you out of the fields. And they shall fill thy houses, and the houses of all thy servants, and the houses of all the Egyptians, which neither thy fathers nor thy fathers' fathers have seen, since the day that they were upon the earth unto this day. And he turned himself, and went out from Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's servants said unto him, How long shall this man be a snare unto us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Knowest thou not yet that Egypt is destroyed? And Moses and Aaron were brought again unto Pharaoh, and he said unto them, Go serve the Lord your God, but who are they that shall go? And Moses said, We will go with our young and with our old, with our sons and with our daughters, with our flocks and with our herds will we go, for we must hold a feast unto the Lord. And he said unto them, Let the Lord be so with you, as I will let you go and your little ones. Look to it, for evil is before you. Not so, go now ye that are men, and serve the Lord, for that ye did desire. And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come up upon the land of Egypt, and eat every herb of the land, even all that the hail hath left. And Moses stretched forth his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. And the locust went up over all the land of Egypt, and rested in all the coast of Egypt. Very grievous were they. Before them there were no such locusts as they, neither after them shall be such. For they covered the face of the whole earth, so that the land was darkened. And they did eat every herb of the land, and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left. And there remained not any green thing in the trees, or in the herbs of the field, through all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron in haste, and he said, I have sinned against the Lord your God, and against you. Now therefore forgive, I pray thee, my sin only this once, and entreat the Lord your God, that he may take away from me this death only. And he went out from Pharaoh, and entreated the Lord. And the Lord turned a mighty strong west wind, which took away the locusts, and cast them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in all the coasts of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, so that he would not let the children of Israel go. Exodus chapter 10, verses 1 to 20. The eighth plague was a plague of locusts. This is not a fact which registers too strongly with modern urban man. His life separates him from the earth and gives him a heedless and unrealistic outlook. But locusts can lead to famine if an infestation is widespread. In the West, since World War I, locusts at times have been so thick that automobiles have skidded on highways as on ice. Clothing on a clothesline hung out to dry has been completely eaten except for the tiny piece protected by the clothespin. The opening of a door has brought hundreds into a house. For all of Egypt to be infested meant that the later grain crops were devoured, as were all the leaves on trees. Because the whole land was affected, food had to be purchased from other countries, decapitalizing Egypt. Ellison is right in describing locust plagues in antiquity and now as a thing of terror in the Near and Middle East. In verse 2, we are told that God requires that this and other plagues be remembered and the account thereof told and retold. Some paraphrases stress God's contempt for Egypt. James Moffat rendered the central part of verse 2 thus: "You may tell your sons and your grandsons how I made fools of the Egyptians." Robert L. Cate rendered it: "I have made sport of the Egyptians." R. Alan Cole saw it also as God made sport of Egypt. Those who treat God lightly find in due time that God treats them lightly. Meanwhile, Pharaoh's authority was eroding. His servants, or palace staff, said to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the Hebrews go as they requested. Knowest thou not yet that Egypt is destroyed?" Verse 7. This is blunt speaking, and it tells us of the disintegration of Pharaoh's authority. As a result, Aaron and Moses were recalled to Pharaoh's presence. Pharaoh was willing, he said, to let the men go, but the women and children had to remain as hostages. Verses 9 to 11. Pharaoh denied Israel the freedom to leave when Moses found these terms unacceptable. As a result, the locusts came upon Egypt. In such an infestation, not only is all vegetation eaten in the fields and from all the trees, but even wood is attacked and marred. Pharaoh, however, was a loser before the locusts were unleashed against Egypt. His retinue now bitterly resented his stubborn pride and its consequences for Egypt. As a result, Pharaoh's situation was a very precarious one. People are not long loyal to a ruler whose policies are destroying them. In Psalm 105, verses 34 and 35, we have a reference to the destructiveness of this plague. The memory of the plagues on Egypt lingered for centuries, and other peoples at times were fearful of Israel because of that knowledge. As Chadwick noted, and so we find, many years after all this generation has passed away, that a strangely distorted version of these events is current among the Philistines in Palestine. In the days of Eli, when the ark was brought into the camp, they said, "Woe unto us! Who shall deliver us out of the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all manner of plagues in the wilderness." 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 8. And this, along with the impression which Rahab declared that the Exodus and what followed it had made, may help us to understand what a mighty influence upon the wars of Palestine the scourging of Egypt had, how terror fell upon all the inhabitants of the land, and they melted away. Joshua chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. The loss of historical memory goes hand in hand with the loss of an awareness of consequence. Men devalue the past because they refuse to learn from it. As a result, one generation after another repeats the follies of the past. Men who ignore the past do so because they believe that they can or have transcended it. Sins are repeated because men assume that they now govern all consequences. Thus, whether it be the adoption of euthanasia and abortion, or the abandonment of the gold standard, men assume that their ostensibly new wisdom and power nullify morality and causality. Morality and causality are inseparably tied together. Paul tells us that the wages of sin is death. Romans chapter 6, verse 23. The causality of creation is a God-ordained causality and hence a moral one. We have today an assault on both causality and morality. Pharaoh rejected God and God's man Moses, and as a result, God's causality exacted its price, a moral judgment on Egypt. A visitation of locusts in the Canary Islands 3 centuries ago is described thus by an eyewitness. The air was so full of them that I could not eat in my chamber without a candle. All the houses being full of them, even the stables, barns, chambers, garrets, and cellars. I caused cannon powder and sulphur to be burnt to expel them, but all to no purpose. When the door was opened, an infinite number came in, and the others went out, fluttering about, and it was a troublesome thing when a man went abroad to be hit on the face by those creatures, so that there was no opening one's mouth, but some would get in. Yet all this was nothing, for when we were to eat, these creatures gave us no respite. When we cut a bit of meat, we cut a locust with it, and when a man opened his mouth to put in a morsel, he was sure to chew one of them. I have seen them at night when they sit to rest, them that the roads were 4 inches thick of them, one upon another, so that the horses would not trample over them, but as they were put on with much lashing, pricking up their ears, snorting and treading fearfully. The wheels of our carts and the feet of our horses bruising these creatures, there came forth from them such a stench as not only to offend the nose, but the brain. I was not able to endure it, but was forced to wash my nose with vinegar and hold a handkerchief dipped in it continually at my nostrils. This is not an account of as devastating an infestation as has repeatedly occurred, nor as severe as that upon Egypt. Hyatt described the damage from locust plagues in ancient and modern times as enormous. As a result, Pharaoh, knowing the devastation locusts could work, attempted for the first time to negotiate with Moses in advance to prevent a plague from coming on the land. Martin North described the result of a plague of locusts as dreadful famine. Pharaoh knew this, but he refused to surrender to God. Instead, in verse 10, we are told that he charged Moses, "Evil is before you," or "evil is what you purpose." Then, as now, the evil ones charge the godly with evil motives and acts. By this, they underscore the necessity for judgment. We are told in verse 11 that Pharaoh had Moses and Aaron driven out of his presence. In so doing, he brought in judgment. The locusts in such infestations cling to a man's skin and clothing. They cover him when he attempts to sleep. They are a nightmare to live with. All this did not cause Pharaoh to do more than pretend repentance. Sin leads to, even as it begins in, not only moral evil, but also irrationality. Pharaoh's men had declared, "Knowest thou not yet that Egypt is destroyed?" Verse 7. Have you not realized that you have destroyed Egypt? This Pharaoh refused to acknowledge more than momentarily. Then, as now, men at war against God choose death because they are the enemies of life. Igor Shafarevich has said of Marxism that it seeks the abolition of private property, the destruction of religion, the death of the family, and the death of man. Every form of unbelief is in pursuit of death to one degree or another. Wisdom declares always, as the expression of God's being, "He that sinneth against me wrongeth his own soul. All they that hate me love death." Proverbs chapter 8, verse 36.